Welcome to the Special Education Essentials for Parents and Families podcast with your host, David Tollner. In each episode, we'll have guests who are professionals in the special education and disability services industry who support children with special needs. The law is complex, and this podcast does not cover all situations, legal responsibilities, or variations in different circumstances. This podcast is for entertainment and informational purposes only, and nothing contained in this podcast should be construed as legal advice. The views expressed in this podcast may not be those of the host or the firm. We are not responsible for any losses, damages, or liabilities that may arise from the use of this podcast. This podcast is not intended to replace legal advice. You can find this show on all the major platforms including YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Apple Podcast, Spotify, and on our website, TollnerLawOffices.com. Now, here's the host of Special Education Essentials for Parents and Families, David Tollner.
All right, welcome everyone to Special Education Essentials. This is our fourth episode, and we're very lucky today to have Molly Matava with us. I am your host, David Tollner, and if you have not had the opportunity to see the first three episodes, I invite you to do that, in part because it's me talking about 10 essential rules to an IEP, how to get a better IEP result for your child with learning disabilities. And I think that's critical to understanding where we go from here. In fact, Molly is intentionally our first interviewee for this podcast for a good reason. Molly is what we call an advocate in the special ed business, which is a little different than an attorney. I am also an advocate, of course, but I am a licensed attorney. And in special ed, we draw a distinction between an attorney and an advocate. And what's key about an advocate is they can really help you go through the IEP process, and particularly the 10 rules of a successful IEP that I walked through in the first three episodes, which is why I would love if you went back and watched those, because that's critical information that somebody like Molly works with every day and can assist special ed parents with that process. So without further ado, Molly, welcome. It's great to see you always.
Thank you.
And welcome to
be here.
Welcome to Special Ed Essentials. All right, tell us what it is. First of all, when did you get in to being an advocate? Why? It's always special ed is always one of those areas of law that everybody has a unique story about what brought them in. And I'm sure you're no different. So if you could tell our listeners what it is that got you to be an advocate, and then we'll get into sort of what that does and what you do for your clients.
Sure. Well, I think probably like a lot of people who are in our industry have a loved one with a disability. And I started out advocating for my daughter. I was at odds with the school district and the regional center at the same time. So that was a lot. And what I realized was it was like learning another language. There were so many facets to understanding how to navigate that I just didn't understand. So I just started learning more and more about it. And really it just took off from there. It just became something that I'm really passionate about, and feel like parents really need guidance and benefit from guidance, even though they're their children's own best advocates. Once they are armed with some good information, they can really, do a fantastic job.
So how do you assist them, right? So a parent struggles, they have an IEP, and it's a new language. You're absolutely right. They have no idea what's going on. They're trusting in many respects, sometimes the wrong people to give them that information, which is the district that isn't always looking out for their child's best interest. And so what would you say to our listeners is what you bring to the table, right, as an advocate, even after they've watched this podcast, seen the 10 rules? How do you involve yourself in that process for them?
Well, when I start working with a family, I start by asking them what their experiences have been and what their goals for their child are. So I try to understand their perspective first, and then I look at the documentation. And, most often, I would dare to say always, there's a delta between the parents' understanding of what's happening and what's needed and what their child is all about, and how the documentation reflects that student. So that's really where I come in, trying to understand, how do we convince the school district of something? Do we need to get another expert? Do we need to bring your expert to the IEP meeting? How do we gather data that helps to prove this strong feeling that you have, but that you don't really have any information to support? So, and then another part is just, how do I engage with the school district? It can become an us and them type environment, and that's not conducive to the end goal. So things get emotional, and that rarely helps your child. So we have to focus on, how do I create an environment where I can get my point across and get the school district to understand these aspects of my child that they are not currently understanding, or, they don't want to. So I have to make them.
Right. Well, let me just touch really quickly on your opening statement, which is this delta that exists, right? Sometimes between what the parents think is happening and what is on the written record, right? But and what I talk about in prior episodes is how important it is to make sure everything that is important to you, right, the parents and their child, is in the written record, which is very often when we look at files, and I know the same is for you, it isn't the same. Right. And that if it isn't in the written record, it didn't exist. Right. We can't count on somebody restating something that somebody said verbally. It needs to be in writing somewhere in the record for it to have real meat that we can use. And that's critical. Mm-hmm. And it sounds like part of what you do is identify the holes. Right. You look at the written record. What do we have that supports what we want? And what is missing that the parents may think they have, or they heard it somewhere, and then it turns out it's nowhere useful. And then we have to go in and fix that. So, and then are you typically speaking, are your clients like mine? It's a mix of, I just want a better IEP, I want better outcomes, and I want to stay in the district, or I want a different placement. Are all your clients all over the board like
Definitely,
mine are?
yes. All over the board. It's, it's an individual situation, and then you have the parents that are individuals. And so, it all over the board. But what I would say is that part of my job that I really view as essential is training the parents, helping the parents to gather this information, document things on a regular basis in a way that, ideally appears collaborative and not like they're building a paper trail, but really training the parents to engage on an ongoing basis in a way that supports documenting what's going on, because things happen all the time. They're happening, week in and week out, not just at IEP meetings. And so if you want to show up at an IEP meeting and be able to make your point or get a different service, then a lot of times you're relying on this documentation and gathering of facts just on an ongoing basis.
Right. Now, do you have to announce in advance? I know for an attorneys, we have to announce that we're coming so that the district has the opportunity to get their attorney there. As an advocate that is not an attorney, do you have to announce, or can you just show up on behalf of a parent?
You do not have to announce, but I would say that I don't attend IEP meetings unless I see no benefit of this element of surprise. It kind of sets people off. It creates a negative tenor for the meeting, and it's just not something that I view as positive.
Right. Do you meet with the clients beforehand and go through the record you just analyzed, and are you working hand in hand with the parents to identify what's needed, and you go in like with a plan?
Absolutely. So my process is to talk to the parents, review the record, then go through the IEP with the parents. Sometimes parents don't really understand even the tool that the IEP is. It really is such a strong tool for parents to be able to follow, because not all school district staff follow it in the same way that maybe I do. And so I try to train the parents. So, for example, present levels of performance, that the functional present levels of performance. Sometimes present levels, they'll just include a couple of test elements, maybe even standardized tests, which are not necessarily functional. That's not how the student operates day in and day out. That's really not talking about their independence level. Sometimes there's just nuanced questions that pertain to a particular student that I train the parents. This is what we're looking for. So, and also parent input. What are your parent concerns? Let's be really specific. Anytime you bring up a concern, the district has to make some attempt to address it. So we definitely go through the IEP, and I'm trying to train them on what it is that I see, and then how they can engage with that to create. We're back to the record. We're back to, from my perspective, I'm always ideally trying to create a common view of the student for the whole team, because then we're in such a much better position to make decisions that we could all feel good about. If we have two different views, then it seems we're just doomed to not come up with a plan that everyone can agree on. So yes, the parents are very involved.
And that goes back to your original point about not having it be them and us, right? We're all together, and that's the more that you can. And I'm the same way. People hire me and think I'm going to go in and yell and shout at everybody and that I'm going to get what we want that way. It never works that way, or very rarely works that way. It always the best outcomes always involve a collaboration and understanding the record as well or better than anybody else, so that you can point to the keys that define the student, so that everybody's on the same page, right? That, to your point, that's exactly right. And the other thing I love about you in particular, and other people that understand the language, going back to that point, is that many of my parents and yours, I'm sure, they're not comfortable in that setting. Mm-hmm. They don't know how to ask the right questions because they don't even know the language, and you're teaching them all of this at the same time, right?
Right.
And so somebody like you, who's gone to hundreds, if not thousands of IEPs in your career, knows what questions to ask. And that, I have found, can be very, very useful, and why I will use or refer to someone like you, and particularly you, because I know I've got somebody in that IEP, or my clients will have somebody in that IEP that knows how to ask the right questions, right? To get the detail and the data you need to get everybody in the same place about what's going on with that student.
Absolutely. And that also ties back into something we've talked about before, which is, what's the goal? Where are we, what is our goal that we're trying to achieve out of this IEP meeting? Right. And getting the parents to focus in on what supports that goal. Because honestly, there could be a lot of extraneous details that feel important, or like something that the parent really wants to pursue. But if it's not really leading to a goal, or it's not supporting the ultimate end of how do I help my child at school, then it's not a good use of our time.
That's exactly right. You have to have a plan. You have to have a goal. I mean, the goal is a word that's used in our professions a lot, so it's not quite that goal, right? You have to have a target. I call it a target, right? Yeah. I want to go into every IEP with a purpose, and I know what that purpose is. My clients know what that purpose is. The other side may not yet, but because they see, maybe they're happy with where everything is, even though the student's not making a lot of progress. But we need a target, and then we plan as we go in. And it sounds like you do the exact same thing for your clients.
Yes.
Yeah. And what our listeners may not understand is in special ed, advocates play a very important part, and particularly around setting the stage with the 10 rules I talked about in previous episodes, which is great, right? How to really knowing how to set up an IEP, making sure all the key stuff is on the record. But the law sees us differently, doesn't it? It allows you to do certain things, but not other things. And so talk to our listeners about what that distinction is, so they understand when they would use you,
right?
And then when they might say, you know what, that isn't I need to go get an attorney versus using an advocate because I need more potentially, or I need something different than the advocate can get. Can you describe for us where that distinction lies?
Sure. I mean, I view my job is to assist and train the parents. And so my goal is to help them understand the law, understand their child's rights, understand, if I'm given an IEP, what does that say? And how do we move that forward? My intention is to assist them, but I don't quote the law. I'm not an attorney. I move the ball forward towards the target through collaboration and data gathering and trying to make the district see things my way.
Right.
Where they don't have a choice but to say yes. But there comes a point where I've tried all those things and I'm not at the target, or I'm not close enough to the target, or I just believe you just need an attorney at this point. They're only going to listen to me for so long. And now in order to really reach this target, you're going to need an attorney. And I also think that, an advocate creates a lower level of tension in the environment. And sometimes when you bring an attorney in, it just changes the tenor of the meeting so that the teachers don't want to talk anymore. Or, it's hard. Sometimes people become so intimidated by the fact that an attorney's there that they just have a hard time engaging. And so you lose that. I like to start IEP meetings with the teacher talking first, because that's when everything is possible and things are typically not contentious. So let's hear from the teacher. Let's get their honest opinion. And so I like to think that when you go with an advocate, you're getting more of that kind of lower temperature conversation. And that's when you can get more honesty. And sometimes that's when you can get information from the other side that they may not really have wanted their staff to share, because they're feeling comfortable.
No, it's perfect. And very often, as you know, our clients, they're emotional, right?
Yeah.
Very often even angry, right? Because they don't feel their child has been given the supports that they need, and they're not seeing the progress they want to see. They're accusatory very often. And part of what I see your job and my job, because I have to do the exact same thing, is tone that way down, because we don't get the right information from people that are defensive. We want a conversation. And it sounds like, and I totally agree, when I come in versus somebody like you, there is a hesitancy. And I have to focus on smiling and saying, hey, you know what, and really engaging them directly and asking them in very kind terms what they're seeing in the classroom. Right. Because if you're right, if I walk into an IEP and everybody shuts up and one word answers, I don't get anything. Whereas somebody like you can pull that out of them, because you're coming in saying, listen, I'm really just here to support everyone. Right. And so let's get the information out. And I think that is critical. And I'll say to my listeners, I love when a case transfers from somebody like Molly to me, and particularly Molly, because I know I'm going to get a file that's clean, where I know the facts, that already that information is in the record. right? And then it doesn't mean, by the way, that just because Molly's done a phenomenal job, the district says, okay, here you go, right? Here's that specialty school, or here's that one-to-one aid. But if Molly does her job right, which she always does, and or the parents do it in the same way she does, right? By using in part or in whole the 10 rules we talked about earlier. Now, if the district says no, we've got something.
Right.
Right. And it comes to me, and it's set up for me to do what I do well, which is hitting that target that unfortunately eluded you as an advocate. But here's a question I've never asked you before. I would say a very small percentage of your clients need an attorney, right? I mean, I've certainly received a number of referrals from you over the years, but I know that your clientele is far greater than that, which means you're doing a really, really good job for your clients, and such that they don't ever need me. Would you say that's about right?
Now, I don't refer a lot of parents to an attorney. And some of that is because maybe my phenomenal job, but some of that is, there's a fair number of families that, and that's what I say in meetings, no one really wants to be here. Right. They would love to send their child to school without an aid and not to need all this help, but this is where we are, because this is what the student needs. And so parents are not typically looking to
have conflict.
They really, if the schools will meet them and even most of the way, then they're pretty, I find them to be pretty resilient, cooperative, wanting to work with their local school district. But, there comes a time when, if that's not happening, then, I'm really grateful that we have people like you, David, because I do run into a wall, and the parents and I have typically worked really hard up until that point, and the child is, likely suffering at some level. So it's just great that we have someone like you that can come in, and the school district does notice. It does make a difference.
And just so the listeners understand, part of that difference is the law prevents somebody like Molly going to due process, for example, on behalf of a student. And there's cases on this. It has to be an attorney. A parent can take a case all the way to hearing by themselves. We typically don't suggest that as a good idea, because statistically they win less than 10% of those cases, and the attorney represented clients do far better statistically. And it's just because matters of evidence and presenting a case or something, we've been taught to do and have experienced for years and years, and most parents do not have that experience, and so they struggle in that setting. But just about everything short of going to hearing or filing for due process, an advocate can do, right? So just exactly the kinds of things we're talking about now. You can go in and create great change in an IEP for the better without involving somebody like me in most cases, right?
Yes,
as you
most
just indicated, you rarely refer out.
Yeah. Yes. Yep.
So that's huge. How does somebody, I assume you have a website. I've never looked at it. I just have met you. I don't even remember when we met over the years, but at some point, how does somebody reach you? Somebody who's listening to this says, man, I think I need an advocate. I'm not getting anywhere with my district. Right. I'm trying, but it's not working. How does somebody reach you?
Well, I do have a website. It's bayareaadvocacy.com. I am also reached a lot through Parents Helping Parents. I'm a big fan of Parents Helping Parents as a local PTI, and they have lists of other advocates too. So they also have trainings. I mean, I would say to any parent, call an advocate, call me, call somebody else, but look for every opportunity to become trained. These webinars like this, really learning all the different facets of how do I deal with the school? How do I understand my child's disability, which is its own, its own learning curve. But just try to learn as much as you possibly can. And bring people to the meetings with you, even if you can't afford an advocate. Bring a really smart friend to come and take notes for you and help you ask your questions.
Yep.
But you can reach me at bayareaadvocacy.com, or my email is mollymatava@gmail. So I will respond as quickly as I can, but I get a lot of people inquiring.
Yes. Well, here's every once in a while, it doesn't happen anywhere near often enough. I'll get a call and meet with a family who had just had their child diagnosed, and they just are entering the system, right? They have a 3 or 4-year-old, and they're just getting in, and the parent will tell me, which I think is just brilliant, I've just had my child diagnosed. I have no idea what an IEP is about. Will you please teach me this system?
Right.
And my response to that is, oh my God, I wish everybody did that, because I'm sure you get the exact same response that I get for most of my clients, which is, I wish I had hired you long before.
Right.
Because here is this system that nobody, unless they had a previous child that went through it, and so they picked it up that way, or they had a sibling that went through it and they picked it up that way. If you didn't have that, was statistically you would not have, or most people don't, you have no understanding what you're getting into when when the doctor gives you, your pediatrician or somebody else gives you a diagnosis, and now you're in this system involving your school district that is clueless to you, and somehow you have to get that information. And the cheapest, best way to get it, I've always thought, is through somebody like you, right? Cheaper than an attorney. And with all the same information, all the same directives, right? Everything that a parent needs to get it from the beginning. So if you're listening to this and you're at the beginning of the IEP process and your child is just now or recently been put on an IEP and found eligible, consider finding an advocate in your area, because learning that system is not impossible. It's not rocket science, but it is different than anything you've experienced. And a cheaper and better way of learning is to find an advocate in your area and utilizing them, because that's key. If you think you're going to get everything you need from this IEP team, you might, and you might be very fortunate to be in a district that gets it. And they are out there. I don't disparage teachers at all, or even the administrators, or not very often, and certainly not publicly, because I understand how difficult their job is, right? They really do struggle with fewer resources than we all want for them. But at the same time, not all of them are there to make sure your child gets the very best education they can. And so somebody like you really can teach you the ropes, so that you can take charge of your child's education yourself in a system that is brand new to you, and you won't be able to navigate very easily alone. And so that makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, just to add on to that, it seems impossible to expect a parent to really understand all of the I tell parents, this is what these people do for a job. Like, this is their living, and you're coming in. And I think it puts parents in a very vulnerable position. So even when the school district might be telling them something that's true, they just feel the weight of some of these decisions. How do I make the best decisions for my child? And even when I tell them, well, you have to stop using the word best. Like,
right.
Just amongst
rule number one, right?
We can, but that's not what your child is entitled to. But your child is entitled to access and looking at your child across a range of skills, not just academics, their social skills, their language skills, their motor, all these. So you're looking at your child as a whole person. And so teaching parents how to interact with the school staff, how to use the IEP to their advantage, because it's a really robust tool if you push the boundaries on it. If you push it to its limits, it's a very robust tool. And
totally agree. Yeah, no, there's more power there than parents understand. When they really get to understand it, they get that, all right, this is an opportunity, right? I always talk about an IEP as an opportunity. It's an opportunity to create significant change in the educational direction of your child. And parents need to understand that. And if they don't, then they're following someone else who isn't necessarily thinking about what is the very best thing, even though we're not supposed to use the word best. But as a parent, it's hard not to use that word because you want the best for your kid. And so, although you don't use it publicly, certainly privately, we can be thinking about what is the best thing for these children. And then the IEP is a process that allows us at least the opportunity to get that. Even though the law, so you know if you're listening, does not require districts to offer the best for your child, right? There's a basic floor that they keep commenting on is all they need to do, and they're right. But that drive toward meaningful progress has enough ambiguity in it legally that allows us a lot of power and leeway with the IEP process. There's an opportunity there that most parents don't understand. Which is the whole point of this podcast, from beginning to end, episode after episode, is to make sure they get that there are professionals like you out there that are waiting to help them, and that there's an awful lot that even if they think they understand the process, perhaps they don't. Although, let me just say this: if your child's making progress in your mind, and you have a great relationship with the district and everybody's communicating well and driving that progress and you're happy, God bless you. That is wonderful news. You don't need us, and we don't want you to need us. Trust us. We really don't, because there's just so many people out there that do, because that's not what's happening. Not every district is the same. Some districts really bend over backwards to do what's right, and some turn over the other way to not give as much because their resources are just not what are needed to do right.
And all right. Another point that I think, one last point is that I think there are also big transitions in students' lives, school lives that would warrant, getting more information on, whether it's from an advocate or additional training, but different things happen from grade to grade or into middle school. You're starting to look at high school, there's these transitions that take place, lots of transitions. And lots of transitions for your child. But when there's a big transition coming, understanding how do I want to get there? How are things going to change? I have this great teacher now, but what do I need to put in my IEP to make sure that continues? If I get a teacher who's maybe not as skilled or doesn't have, build in these types of supports that my child really thrives with.
Right. And that comes out obviously with all of our clients is we'll see the student with great teachers for first, second, and third grade. And then they get one that's not so great. And then it's like, whoa, everything was going great. And now all hell's broken loose. And there are natural transitions in education where we see all kinds of differences. Middle school, right, or elementary to middle is one, middle to high school, but even within elementary, because so much changes, that the added curriculum, the harder academics of third grade, the tendency in fourth grade that we see of children starting to recognize their differences, right, their learning differences as opposed to their peers. We see a lot of anxiety really start to develop in fourth grade as most students start to recognize who they are in comparison to others for the first time. So there's so many of these transitional timeframes, right, in education that if you see coming, you can prepare for. If you don't see coming and it's your first child, all of this hits you like a brick sometimes. And then, right, so again, to the listener, if you have a child on an IEP, which I'm anticipating you do or about to, or you wouldn't be listening to this, if you feel like you don't have a ton of information about IEPs, I would seek out an advocate like Molly to get you heading in that direction, so that as you see these transitional moves for your student even if it's going well now, it may not be going well next year when middle school hits or whatever that transition is that creates difficulty in your child's education. And being prepared for that early on could be huge.
Absolutely.
Right? And keep you from needing me and only needing Molly, and potentially only needing Molly for a short time, right? While you learn this system and then you take it on your own, right? That's the key, is that it's so unusual. Getting as much information about it is critical, I think, to a successful education for your child. So I hope that all makes sense to the listeners. Molly, I cannot thank you enough for agreeing to be on. I thank you always for your professionalism and the quality when I get a referral, which is not very often, but when I get it, I know it's set up beautifully for me to do what I do. So I always appreciate that as well. All right. With that, everyone, that'll conclude our 4th episode of Special Education Essentials. We look forward to seeing you at the next one. Next episode, we're going to have the executive director of Open Mind School, and she'll be talking about that school and what she provides for her students there. And over the course of this podcast, we're going to have lots of other experts, if you will. We'll have IEE assessors. We'll have potentially more advocates like Molly to talk about their perspective, certainly more specialty schools, pediatricians, et cetera. We want the whole breadth of what of the information we think you need to develop a successful IEP for your child. So with that, thank you again, Molly. I look forward to seeing you soon. And we'll see everyone else at the next edition of Special Education Essentials. Thank you all.
You've been tuning in to the Special Education Essentials for Parents and Families podcast with your host, David Tollner. This podcast is not intended as legal advice and does not create an attorney-client relationship. Please talk to your legal counsel about your own situation. You can find this show on all the major platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Apple Podcast, Spotify, and on our website, tollnerlawoffices.com. Thank you for your positive reviews, comments, questions, and for sharing this show with others.